Well, hello and welcome to the Psychedelic Diaries. I am your host, Ray Christian, and do we have a show for you today? Ethnopharmacologist and overall living legend in the psychedelic industry, Dennis McKenna will be joining us momentarily for a deep dive and a soul search. As usual, we'll start the show with a nugget and a noodle, and producer Kevin is here helping out. And please subscribe to the show because it will really butter his bread. Okay, well, producer Kevin is gluten-free and not eating bread, so fine. No buttering bread. Don't even subscribe. That's cool. Whatever you want to do. Enjoy the show. And today's news nugget: psychedelics for heart disease and diabetes. A new study has come out from Oxford after surveying 375,000 individuals, showing that psychedelics appears to reduce the risk of both diseases, heart disease and diabetes, by 50%. More exciting news for psychedelics. And as for the noodle, something I've been noodling on of late, is the idea of clinical trials for creativity and cognitive performance. Now, in lieu of legalization, of course, it makes sense to triage and start with psychedelics for those that are ill. But the application for healthy people is just as important. And it's a much larger population as well, not to mention an opportunity for preventive medicine. So how could we structure research to prove that, let's say, magic mushrooms can improve creativity and cognitive performance? Well, perhaps studies around a shift in word choice, tonality, and body language, or perhaps research with musicians, painters, and writers. And then maybe we could use AI or advanced technology to analyze their work for subtle patterns of novelty. Something to noodle on. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may direct your attention to the left side of your screen, he is an ethnopharmacologist, the president and founder of the McKenna Academy, Dennis McKenna. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Good stuff. Well, let's dive right in, Dennis.
All right.
First off, I just want to say on behalf of many people in this industry and people that are impacted by psychedelics directly or indirectly, thank you for being one of the true leaders, one of the steady, consistent voices in this space. You've been doing this for years, for decades, and it feels like it's time for harvest now, or at least we're close to it. And the impact of your work, Dennis, is having really an incredible ripple effect on the world. And I'm curious to get your take on that and also what that ripple effect looks like. So my question to you is, as you see this rapid growth in the psychedelics industry, let's just fast forward and wave a magic wand 10, 20 years. Imagine we get full on legalization. What do you think that world looks like?
Well, that's a tall question. I think it looks like a better world than this world. You know, in a sense, I think, you know, there are lots of challenges with introducing psychedelics into our society, the global society, because we don't have a tradition for these things. You know, these were under the stewardship of indigenous cultures for so long. Now global culture is coming along and more or less co-opting that, and that's inevitable, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, although I think it is important to recognize, number one, that we are, you know, in a sense, we're borrowing or we're building on these traditions, and we should pay attention to the indigenous traditions, because if anybody knows how to use these things, it's those groups. They've been doing this for 10,000 years. That's a lot longer than the FDA has existed. So, you know, there's no way that these substances should ever have been prohibited. And so I'm encouraged that we're getting past that, you know, and I think the decrim movements that are happening in different municipalities and states and so on, definitely a healthy sign, because the positive aspects of psychedelics are finally being recognized. You know, there's back in the day when I was a lone voice, I wasn't a lone voice. It's also important to realize, I mean, I thank you for your compliments, but on the other hand, I'm just one of many. I'm not, you know, there's nothing special about me except that I've been around a long time. and refuse to stop talking about this. But I think that I often say in my talks that psychedelics are medicine for the soul.
Mm.
And they're medicine for the individual soul, for the collective soul, the cultural soul, and even the planetary soul. They can heal on all levels, you know. And in the traditional context, this is understood that, you know, they're not simply medicines that you give somebody because they have a mental disorder or a mental illness. They're teachers. They are regarded as teachers in the indigenous context. What do they teach? They teach us how to be better human beings, you know, and we need a lot of that. I mean, if you look around at the social context these days, so much division, so much, you know, all of the sort of the turmoil that goes on around politics, and everybody's, you know, in their little particular silos of whatever their you know, ideological positions are. This is not good. You know, psychedelics have the potential to bring people together, to help us appreciate each other, appreciate nature, importantly, to refocus our attention on nature and how out of touch with nature we've become, you know, and to learn to be better people. So you say, look forward 50 years or so. It's hard to do, but I think if we have a society left in 50 years, I'm not sure that we will, you know, but hopefully psychedelics will be accepted, will be accessible to everyone, and people will learn how to use these in a responsible way and a constructive way. And this is happening, you know, this is now happening in this culture. It's been a long time coming, but we're getting there.
It's beautifully put, and I appreciate your call out of appreciation of ourselves and appreciation for nature. I've found throughout my work over the years that I find myself more and more frequently having a sense of wonder and awe at my own body, at my own mind, and the same thing with a tree. And this sounds silly to the uninitiated, but sometimes I'll look at a plant or a tree and just be like, oh my goodness, this is beautiful. And then you can take it to a bigger scale, obviously, with nature at large. For me, my experience has primarily been with magic mushrooms and psilocybin, and some as well with LSD. And for my money, I think psilocybin is the Mona Lisa from my experience, but everyone's got an opinion. And you once said that psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, is the perfect molecule. What made you say that?
It's the perfect molecule because it does, you know, for a number of reasons. It's non-toxic, right? It's compatible with human metabolism, so it's relatively safe, and it comes in a natural form. You know, the psilocybin mushrooms, unlike something like ayahuasca or some of these other preparations, some of these other natural psychedelics, psilocybin does not require any preparation. All you have to do is have to have curiosity enough to bend over and pick up the mushroom and eat it, and then then the rest happens naturally. So and as it comes into clinical use, I think it's the perfect psychedelic, not only for ceremonial use and you know, in a ceremonial context, which it has been used for thousands of years, but as we try to medicalize these things or bring them into mainstream medicine, well, that's a whole other challenge. But as far as being safe to use in a clinical setting, they are generally, and the length of the experience is short enough that you know, you can come into a clinic in the morning and go home for supper. You know, theoretically, it's
Sure.
not gonna keep you in a 36-hour, you know, hell world like some of these things can do. Not that those things don't have their place, but as far as if there was a perfect psychedelic, I think psilocybin is it. My brother used to say psilocybin is made for man, and he was, of course, that was before we had our gender sensitivities. So he should have said made for humans, but I think they are made for humans. And I actually think we can make the case that that humans have been co-evolutionary partners with psilocybin mushrooms for potentially millions of years. This actually goes back to the what's sometimes called the stoned ape hypothesis, that these things may have played a role in the origin of consciousness, in the origin of our cognitive abilities and the human imagination. We're planning to do a one-day symposium on this sometime this year, hopefully before the end of the year, because my brother's book, The Food of the Gods, which was published in 1993, has been reprinted in a new edition. And so in honor of that, we want to hold a symposium and get people's perspective, because when the idea was first proposed, it was dismissed, more or less. Well, that's crazy. It's actually not so crazy. And new information has emerged to make it more plausible. And so we're going to do a symposium at some point on the, stoned ape, on the stoned ape, but that's not necessarily a positive way to look at it. But let's say, fungal symbiosis with humanity in the origin of the human imagination.
And so I'm glad you touched on it. For the uninitiated on this topic, my understanding of it, I wasn't sure if the origin of consciousness and the stoned ape theory were overlapped, very similar. My understanding of the stoned ape, and please, I'll pass the baton to you afterwards, is essentially that over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, apes, our ancestors, were essentially picking up psilocybin mushrooms and eating them. And the benefits from those compounds on the brains of our ancestors were then changing the physiology of the apes to then increase evolution or speed up evolution. Mm-hmm. Does that sound about right?
All of the above. Yes, all of the above. One thing that we've learned about psilocybin and other psychedelics, but psilocybin has been the main one, is it stimulates neuroplasticity, right? Neuroplasticity being the ability of the brain to actually change. Back in the day, we used to think that you're born with a certain complement of neurons, and that's pretty much what you have all your life, and they slowly die off. So as you age, you lose neurons. But we now know that's not true, that new neurons can grow, and that psilocybin and other psychedelics actually can stimulate neural growth. It can stimulate the organization of neural networks, increase the connectivity, all of those things. It actually makes your brain function better. It's basically the brain's ability to respond to environmental stimuli, which the mushrooms are, and change in response to it. And actually that feeds back on the genome. So then the other side of this coin is something called epigenetics. And epigenetics is a way for this information to be transmitted across generations without going through the typical method, the typical approach to inheriting mutations, which involves, transmitting through the gametes and all that. There is a different way to do it. Epigenetics is changes that can diffuse through a population and actually incorporate those changes across generations. So these two mechanisms, neuroplasticity and epigenetics, were not really talked about when Terence wrote his book. These came on later, but they provide a plausible mechanism for the way that hominids evolving in northern Africa were clearly I mean, all the paleogeoclimatic data and all the fossil data indicates that they grew, that, Northern Africa was a wet and rainy place, almost a tropical place at that time, a couple million years ago. And hominids were there. We also know that cattle were there, or the precursors of modern cattle. The mushrooms happen to grow on the dung of cattle. So we know these two things were there. Mushrooms don't leave much of a trace over 2 million years, but it's a reasonable inference that they were probably in these environments. If you look at a similar ecology today, anywhere in the tropics where there's a pasture, you're going to find the pan-tropical psilocybin mushroom, Psilocybe cubensis, which is a big, colorful, robust mushroom. It's hard to ignore, and it's not, a lot of psilocybin mushrooms are small, but Psilocybe cubensis, which happens to inhabit these pastoral environments, is very easily noticed. And if you're a curious primate, possibly a hungry primate as well, sooner or later you're going to eat these things, and then you'll have the revelation, and that changes everything. So that's how it may have happened. If you look evolutionarily at the evolution of the human brain, we know that in about approximately 2 million years, it increased in size and complexity. The size of the human brain, it increased about 3 times between the earliest hominids and Homo sapiens, the current instantiation of the hominid line. So it's possible to make a case that psilocybin contributed to this complexification of the human neural hardware.
Well put. And it feels like all these factors were there. We know the cattle, we know the primates were there, and we know they would have wanted to eat. We saw this aggressive growth of the brain over time. And so maybe it's something we'll never truly be able to prove, but there sure is a lot of smoke there. And maybe that fire is there, that was what caused it. And it makes sense that people like your brother would have espoused that theory, people that experienced quite a bit of magic mushroom use, because they probably, people that do, saw what happened to their own minds. And obviously over millions of years of evolution, and as you said, epigenetics, and even the Richard Dawkins style memes where it affects the culture, with genes and memes both evolving, it could have that impact. And I firmly believe it, because and obviously for me this is subjective, and a lot of what's in the psychedelic space becomes subjective and ineffable. But Dennis, I feel like I'm not world class. I don't have a world class mind or synapse firing, and my career has been pretty good. I've been lucky. I felt I've had some good runs. And it was about 5 years ago that I basically discovered the impact that it had on myself, and both for emotional health, the domestication of my own emotions, my own cognitive ability and creativity. And as I mapped the discovery of psilocybin as an adult about 5 years ago to my career, there's a very clear correlation. Is it correlation? Is it causation? I would submit that it's causation for me, because I had a significant jump in what I can do in social settings, what I can do in terms of extemporaneous articulation, what I can do for creativity, my abilities as a leader, my lack of fear of death, and also just a lack of fear in many challenges, in taking risks. And those are all certain things that could adapt and benefit a primate clan, if you will, or a species, if you will. And I was shocked at the person I've become, from what essentially amounts to about once a month, taking a full dose between 1.75 and 4 grams per month. And on that note, I'm curious, I actually have, after about 5 years, it was almost as if, Dennis, that the medicine said, all right, pump the brakes, Ray. We've taught you quite a bit. You don't have to keep coming back to college here and come to the same frat party, as it were. And I don't feel as called to do it every month. And I'm curious for you, at the height of your exploration, what was your cadence, and what has that evolved to now?
I mean, my 2 main plant teachers have been mushrooms and ayahuasca, and I have. I didn't have like a set schedule, but a lot of my use of them was context specific. In other words, if I was in a place where this was happening, I have been, at least before COVID hit and all that, I was organizing ayahuasca retreats and that sort of thing in South America. So my use was related to the occasions, like with ayahuasca. I would take it maybe a dozen times a year, just because it was
Similar cadence.
Yeah, similar cadence. Mushrooms, not as much because I wasn't taking mushrooms. Now I'm using them, somewhat more because that's what's there. And I'm not doing these ayahuasca retreats anymore, just because you can't travel and all that. I don't really have a schedule, but I do think that it's important to look beyond the chrysanthemum once in a while. And now, like you, I feel like I don't have to take them once a month or even, for me, a couple times a year seems to be about the right cadence. But I've been there many times, so maybe I don't have to go back to the well so often because we've been there, we've been around there. But it's good to check in once in a while because you can forget, and it's good to return to the well occasionally, and so you don't forget. This is it's really important. And you said something earlier about your the appreciation of nature that it's given you. I think this is one of the main things that psychedelics can teach you, is that we live in a world of wonder. Wonder is everywhere. Just to look at a tree, look at the way it works, that's an incredible being, and all biological systems. And the deeper you look, the more marvelous they become. And I think that not only does psilocybin, and particularly psilocybin, but other psychedelics, but not only do they help us learn about ourselves and learn to be better humans, better partners, better members of society. They have an effect on all this, but then they're also, they're basically symbiotic partners, and especially mushrooms. So they have a co-evolutionary effect, basically. And they, one of their primary messages, especially in this particular historical juncture, is all about how far out of sync we've gotten with nature, how far out of harmony. And the message is getting, they're becoming more and more hysterical, you'd almost say, to get the monkeys to wake up and realize what is going on. So as they've gone global, this message has been propagated. And that may not be, that may be part of a natural process, that they're these, they are teachers there, but we're recalcitrant students. We don't assimilate the message. We need to keep needing to knock us on the head and remind us what the message is. But everybody's cadence is different. I end up doing them maybe 2 or 3 times a year these days.
That seems
and
wise.
That's enough. You don't forget.
Yeah, it's like you hit a point of no return where it's like, okay, now you see the full picture. And as long as you get your maintenance in and check the oil every once in a while, you're okay.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, really quick follow-up to the idea of ayahuasca versus psilocybin. Those are probably the 2 most popular plant medicines. How would you describe the differences between the 2 as in terms of subjective experience?
Well, they are similar. It's a similar pharmacology. I would say that ayahuasca is more of a mind-body medicine. Ayahuasca will put you through changes on the physical level that may be uncomfortable, but probably are beneficial. All the purging and all that, which mushrooms normally don't do. Ayahuasca is a purgative, it's recognized in traditional context that that's what it does. And for example, it's very good against parasites. It's a good, most of us probably in the so-called developed world, we don't have parasites to worry about, but it is beneficial on the body as well as the brain. I think psilocybin and psilocybe is more cerebral in a certain way. It's not necessarily on the physical level so much, but they're really complementary, I think, to each other. I mean, both have aspects that, you know, I mean, they stand on their own. You know, they both have aspects that the other one lacks. So ayahuasca is, you know, well, it's just different, you know.
I appreciate that. That's helpful, especially that more of a body element for ayahuasca. That's helpful for those that are exploring. And maybe psilocybin is a little bit gentler if it's just cerebral, maybe a gentler start, and maybe even starting with microdosing to then ramp up to ayahuasca for the budding psychonaut, if you will. And I loved that you brought back this idea of the sense of wonder, because in addition to the sense of awe and appreciation for body and the world, one of the things that occasionally strikes me, especially when I'm feeling a bit woe is me and a little butthurt, if you will, is I'll think to myself, just the sheer absurdity that we are even here and alive, that this was a planet of lava, chemical properties, and rocks, and we became this walking, talking human being, and it's stunning, and
yeah,
and what a beautiful thing.
A beautiful thing, and psychedelics help you appreciate that, just how really marvelous this is, you know. And one of the interesting things you can say about psychedelics, and again, especially psilocybin, you can think of them as a lens through which you can view the world.
Yes.
You know, psilocybin is almost like a scientific instrument. It's like a microscope or a telescope. It's something, it lets you step out of your reference frame temporarily and look at your relationship with nature, look at nature in a way that you've never looked at it before, because it has this ability to, it brings the background forward, and we're a very visually oriented culture and everything because we're readers, right? And reading always creates that separation between you and whatever you're reading. Well, I'm not advocating don't be literate. I mean, I think we all value our literacy, but we have to realize that imposes limitations on our point of view. An indigenous person, or I would suggest a child who is in a very similar mindset before they're able to read, sees the world, many more channels are open. You know, a lot of what we learn to do, you've probably heard this term default mode network, right?
Yes.
That's the set of habits and assumptions and perceptions and associations and so on that you construct to help you make the world make sense, you know. And a lot of what the brain does, the brain is a channel for information, but it's also a gate. A lot of what it does is what it keeps out of your day-to-day perception, because if everything came in, it would just be a blooming, buzzing confusion. So there is this selective gating that goes on to construct this default mode network, which I prefer my own term for that, which is the reality hallucination. You know, we inhabit a model of reality, not reality itself. We don't directly interface with reality itself, which is unknowable. What we do is take information from the outside through our sensory portals. We combine that with memories and associations and all sorts of internal things, and we kind of extrude this reality which we inhabit, this reality bubble which we inhabit, which is comprehensible, and does it, and we have to do that. That's a survival technique. And normally you want that. You want to be able to, navigate through the world, and simple things like drive a car, open a can of tuna fish. All of these things are like, challenges on psychedelics, right? But it's useful occasionally to shatter that, to completely disable that default mode network, and it lets you step outside the reference frame and see things about yourself. That's where the therapeutic aspect comes in, but see things also about the world around you, things that you've never noticed before, because we're programmed to put things in the background. So you change that relationship, and suddenly you see processes in nature that are always there. These are not hallucinations. These are not things you make up. They're just things that we suppress in our perception because they're not immediately required to protect you against the saber-toothed tiger that's coming to get you. I mean, you want to be focused on that saber-toothed tiger, right? But when that's not a problem, when you're not immediately under threat from those kinds of things, then this lets you relax and apprehend the world in a more holistic way, and notice processes in nature that we just don't pay attention, because we're not detail oriented. And psilocybin is this lens that lets you focus on certain processes that maybe you never looked at closely before, but then you look at them and you realize, wow, this is wonderful, this is marvelous, this is going on. And so I think that's part of what psilocybin does, as it's a channel into the, what you might call the inherent intelligence that's embedded in nature at every level. That's what it is. I mean, intelligence is a good word for it. I'm a believer in the Gaia hypothesis. I think that Gaia is the planetary community of species, and it is intelligent. And if you look at the way nature's organized, it's just, you have to marvel at how cleverly it's put together, and it's not like there's an external designer, right? It's not that. Nature is the designer. Nature is its own designer. And by the very way that it's organized, it tends to find optimal solutions, so that's why when you look at nature, it's not only does it work, but it's elegant and beautiful in the way it works. And that's why, and those are the lessons we could get from nature. There's a way for us to mimic that. In fact, you're probably aware, there's a whole field of design called biomimicry, biomimetic design, and we learn by looking at nature. And psilocybin, things like that, let us open up to what nature has to, quote unquote, tell us or speak to us, that we normally close off because it's not pertinent to our immediate survival. Am I making any sense?
That's beautiful. Thank you for that share. And this idea of nature as the designer and the Darwinian approach towards nature and how we got here, it made me think of a slight realization I had. Maybe it's a non-epiphany for you, but the idea of, okay, if everything that is alive still, whether it's an alligator or a horseshoe crab or humans, there's a certain fitness to that animal. And that is what allowed it to survive and be here now. But if you take a step back and abstract to the reality level of like literally the nature of this reality, the nature of this existence, we are here. This reality that you are in is here. So perhaps there must be something fit about this particular reality. And that I was deep in a session when I had that realization. And it's kind of comforting to think that, no, we're in a pretty fit reality, a fit universe. And it kind of warms the soul a little bit. And by the way, what you said about the child versus the human, and the default mode network being quieter for the children, it reminded me of something in meditation where they talk about beginner's mind, where the earlier the mind, the less hardened the neural paths, the more you see. And they say a child's mind is much like a lantern. The consciousness is a lantern towards existence, where we see things with a flashlight, and that's our consciousness as adults.
Exactly. As we mature, we set up these filters, and the filters are important for our functioning, but we've sacrificed the openness, in a certain sense, and psychedelics can help us rediscover that. That's the tool, and that's one of the big things about psychedelics, I think, is they're tools that let us rediscover this openness and sense of wonder that children just naturally have. I mean, all children, especially, if they're happy children, if they're, before they learn to read and they start building these barriers, they're just like little acid heads, they're completely open to everything. And, looking at someone like that as an adult, acting that way, you would say either they're crazy or they've taken psychedelics. But you look at children and you don't think they're crazy. You think they're being children, and they're bringing that wonder and openness to to their experience of the world without the linguistic and the judgmental part of it. So I think that psychedelics are tools to help us rediscover what is that childlike wonder, and wonder and curiosity, let's not forget, is what drives science. It's what drives human creativity. It's like that's at the heart of our intellectual evolution, is somebody with a curiosity looks at a phenomenon and says, oh, I wonder how that works. Why is it like that? Why is the sky blue? Why are flowers red? All of those things. And then that curiosity translates into a more if you're scientifically oriented, or even if you're not, translates into a more systematic look at what is behind these phenomena. But you still have to you have to be open to being amazed.
That's a great way of putting it, being open to being amazed. And you touched on something I've tried to put my finger on, of what made me different in the aftermath of a psilocybin session. For a few days, I felt like I was this like fresh caterpillar that came out of the cocoon, and I was a little bit too vulnerable while the neural paths were still forming. It was a little bit too neuroplastic. And then I would joke that I made up this silly name. I said, then I'm entering the Mozart zone, where I have basically the curiosity and wonder of a child that you just said, but also that's combined with the resilience and intuition of an adult. So you combine those two things in the aftermath of a psilocybin session. That's a formidable combination.
Absolutely. And it keeps you fresh. It's very easy to us to retreat into this default mode network, that protective bubble, or that reality hallucination, that we inhabit. And it is a hallucination. It's a construct filtered through our sensory portals, but it is not reality any more than a map is the territory that it's supposed to map. It's kind of a schematic. It's useful most of the time, but sometimes you just want to set the button to off and let raw reality, fall in on you, come in on you. And psychedelics do that temporarily.
It's very useful. But you're right, it gets caught, and these paths get worn out and they get old and dusty. And it kind of reminds me of so we built some AI technology, and one of the most common neural network technology methods is dropout, where essentially you let the network train and it learns all these cool paths and it finds all these patterns. And then you essentially block about half the path and say, okay, now learn again, but you don't get this other half. And it has to relearn patterns, and it has all these interesting discoveries when that happens. And it seems like psilocybin does that. And one of the last thoughts, I'm curious to get your take on this. on this child analogy, because I think it's really apropos, is the idea that when you're tripping, you are basically a 10-year-old. And that has a lot of good things to it because of the sense of wonder and awe, and you can roll on the floor and music is just amazing. But I think it also sheds light on why I think, and I'm curious to get your take on this, why I think the idea of a bad trip is bullshit. I think there is no bad trip. It is a deep cleaning. And that's what's happening if it hasn't been in a while. If you haven't gone to the dentist, I know you went today. If you haven't gone in 10 years, it's going to hurt. If you haven't cleaned the house in many years, it's going to be a rough cleaning. And if you haven't done any cleaning up here, it's going to hurt a little bit. And on top of that, if it hurts and you also have the resilience and tools to handle adversity of a 10-year-old, it's probably going to be unpleasant, but it's a deep cleaning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is true. I agree with you. I don't think, I mean, any trip that you survive, I suppose there are trips that you don't survive, and we probably have to say that was a bad trip. Other than that, though, even what you might call a bad trip there's no such thing. There can be challenging trips.
Yes.
Often the challenging trips are the most useful. That's where the learning comes. If every time we took psilocybin or ayahuasca, it was just, happy hippies and fuzzy bunnies, that would be pleasant enough, but you wouldn't learn a lot. So it's important to go deep, especially if you're trying to address some problem, some aspect of yourself that you want to have insight into, or some personality element, something that you're trying to change, like what people, the reason people take psychedelics for therapeutic uses to deal with addiction or depression or PTSD and these sorts of things. These are often not separate things, but this ability to just step outside your reference frame, look at your existential situation from a different perspective, often that is the therapeutic, step you need to take. Just the insight of how you relate to, say past traumas, or to maybe you're addicted to tobacco or some other drug, and get a different perspective on how you relate to that substance, the role it plays in your life. You're probably aware of the studies with psilocybin and smoking cessation, which have more spectacular results than any other treatment for smoking cessation that's been developed. I mean, in these studies, people who were like lifetime 3-pack a day smokers, hopeless addicts, take 2 or 3 psilocybin experiences under, with intense therapy, with a therapeutic environment. 86% of those people never smoke again. That's incredible. I mean, from these early studies. So the ability to step out of this reference frame that you've constructed, it'll still be there and you'll get back into it. I mean, reference frame is incredibly resilient. It will reassert itself. But temporarily, while you're free of that, you can make changes, that will last beyond the trip. And that's what we're seeing with psilocybin and these other things, that like the antidepressant effects of psilocybin, 1 or 2 doses, and then the effects are, quite long-lived, and it's because you've changed your reference frame, or you've re-engineered your reference frame. Let's put it that way.
I like this idea of re-engineering your reference frame, and that smoking cessation study and some of these other studies, that number 86%, you would think, okay, that's enough. We've got the FDA could be like, okay, time to reschedule now. And it's been on breakthrough status,
wouldn't you? You
2018.
would think so. Yeah, I know. I know it's frustrating. It'll get there, but yeah, I mean, things are changing.
It's progress. And there's definitely been progress. It's hard to complain.
The government is, I mean, it's interesting that all of this research that's supporting psychedelics, practically all of it, and leading to these breakthroughs, the development of these therapies and so on, it's not coming from government sources. It's coming from either corporate or private sources, through philanthropy and so on. The
Yeah.
Heffter Research Institute, which I'm affiliated with, MAPS, all of these were supported by not through government funding sources. Now we've reached a place where that may actually be changing, and that may be good or bad. We'll have to see. But exactly, I mean, smoking cessation is a good example. Smoking causes so much damage. It's so expensive to the biomedical system, and on the costs, smoking related diseases. You'd think NIH would jump all over this and say, yes, we want to fund this thing.
You'd think smoking cessation would be, no pun intended, the smoking gun, where they say, okay, yes, there's
You
definitely
would
medical
indeed.
value.
But these are hidebound, rigid institutions,
Yes.
and they take a long time to respond, to change.
Well, speaking of rigid and unchanging, I had an experience, Dennis, if you don't mind going into personal experience of the ineffable. I had one magic mushroom experience where, obviously it's tough to put a finger on what happened, but it was a visceral feeling of, I was somehow paradoxically experiencing the life or sensation of being this profound rock star. And on the other hand, I was this homeless vagrant. And I was both. It was this instantaneous toggle of I was both. And I had the sense that I am both, and also that, but for just pure chance and luck, I could have been either one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked away with it thinking, I just feel lucky that, now I see how much true luck played out into being any of those roles. And I also started feeling this sensation of, maybe it's the non-duality concept, but I feel like all of them are me. We're all the same species on some level. And even further than that, perhaps you are this drop of water, like Alan Watts said, you are this drop of water that just for a second glistens in a rainbow, pops into that rainbow. That's you also. Over 80 years, I felt like they are this homeless vagrant and this rock star. They all create me on a daily basis. And that experience has changed me fundamentally. And I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing, what is a psychedelic transcendent experience you can recall?
Well, a lot of them have been transcendent, and I think your experience is very interesting, because again, potentially you were all of these people. You're kind of looking at your alternative histories. You could have been a vagrant, you could have been a rock star, you could have been all these things, and maybe in some alternate world, all parallel universe or whatever, you were these things, but you find yourself in your particular existential situation where you're a great Christian and you pretty much know who you are. But I think that's another way of showing, essentially, as you said, this perception that, but for fortune, I could have been this or that or another thing. So it's a way of showing you, maybe helping us appreciate where we're at and say, well, I'm none of those things. I am this kind of person, and my own experiences have been, similar to that. And it's hard to put my finger on one specific one that led to the revelation or whatever.
Try, if you don't mind. Try one that comes to mind.
Well, I can always recall the experience I had on ayahuasca with an encounter with photosynthesis, which was the first time I took ayahuasca with UDV, the Brazilian church. I had a very profound experience in which I connected with the physiology of the plant on a molecular level, and I became a water molecule, which is one of the reactants in photosynthesis. Photosynthesis uses the power of the sun to split water, actually, and the energy from that is then used to make simple sugars, and carbon dioxide is sequestered out of the atmosphere. that's the other precursor. It's the what E. Cummings once called the green fuse that dries the flower.
Mm.
And that's what photosynthesis is. And I had this profound lesson about photosynthesis and what a miracle it was, and how it was keeping life on Earth, sustaining life on Earth, because everything in the biosphere that does not make their own food, right, is a parasite on plants. Plants make their own food out of sunlight and carbon dioxide. And so I sometimes say, and one of the messages that came through in my experience, which I've repeated many times, as I went through this molecular process from a water molecule standpoint, what happens as you go through this process. And at the end of all this, I was like emotionally drained. I was weeping. I was weeping for the fate of the planet and all this. And then came over my shoulder, the soft voice over the left shoulder that said, "You monkeys only think you're running things," and that was a profound experience, even though it's obvious that we're not running things, but we forget that a lot. And in fact, the plants are running things, really, in the sense that they've mastered this little biochemical miracle that allows life on Earth to be sustained, and that maintains the equilibrium of the biosphere, of the ecosystem. And that, unfortunately, we're busy trying to undermine those homeostatic feedback loops that keep the Earth habitable. Now we're pushing the envelope, and at a certain point, we may reach a point where we cannot reverse it, or it cannot be reversed. Not that we're going to reverse it, but at a certain point, you reach a tipping point. The equilibrium of the biosphere is extremely resilient, but there are limits, and we're pushing the limits. This is why the psychedelics are trying to get the message to us, wake the monkeys up on a global scale, so that we don't make this mistake. I mean, I'm not one of these people that says if everyone took psychedelics, we would be fine and we'd have the realizations that'll save the planet. But I think it contributes to it. I think many people are having these epiphanies. You like that word? I agree, it's a good word. They are having these epiphanies. If more people would have them, and if the right people would have them, then maybe we could wake up.
Dennis, that is beautifully put. And maybe you're right. Enough people get them. We don't need everybody to get pulled out of the matrix, but enough that could be the difference. And that was beautiful. Thank you for that share of feeling photosynthesis at an embodied cellular level. That's fascinating. We may have to do this again at some point. Let's switch gears just a little bit. I want to ask you about the McKenna Academy. You guys are doing a fundraise, and I think you also have a Peru film project. What's going on that you're excited about?
Well, I'm excited about a lot of things the McKenna Academy is doing. I created it because I wanted it to be a forum for dialogue and education, and really a place that fosters this idea of wonder and kind of an open-ended appreciation for being in the cosmos. The full name of the McKenna Academy is the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy. And natural philosophy is what science was before it became quantitative and materialistic. And I think it impoverished itself in a certain way by saying there are only certain ways of knowing or appreciating the world that are legitimate, and thereby excluding other ways of knowing that may not depend on quantitation, may not be reductionist, but quantitation and reductionism does not give a complete picture of the world. It's a way, it's a forum for education in an open-ended way, and primarily, its primary focus is, again, this relationship with nature and appreciation of our coevolutionary position as a member of the community of sentient species. So that's what it's about. And when we started it, or before even we started it, we were thinking that it would be mainly about conferences and retreats in physical locations. Well, about the time we got organized and got the thing incorporated, then COVID hit, and it was like, that's not an option anymore. So we're trying to develop an online presence essentially until things open up a little bit. But we have a number of projects, as I mentioned. We're right now in the middle of teaching a graduate level ethnobotany course in collaboration with the Organization for Tropical Studies, which is a affiliation consortium of many universities. We're teaching that course online. So far, people seem to love it. We have this documentary project going on in Peru. We've just finished the first phase of filming for it, and the idea is kind of to create probably a series of short documentaries that give a snapshot of the current state of traditional medicine and shamanism and all of that in the Amazon at this time, and that sort of post global, post ayahuasca tourism, post COVID world. How is that impacting traditional practices in ethnomedicine in a place like the Amazon? We just completed the first set of films for this, or footage. There will be a short documentary that will come out probably early in 2022, and then we want to find the funding support to expand that into a series of 6 to 8 short, like half-hour to 45-minute documentaries that'll look at different aspects of this and kind of just help people appreciate what is going on in these traditional cultures that are not so traditional anymore. They're impacted by globalism like everybody else, and what's emerging out of it is a different a different expression of these things, but more appropriate to a global culture. So if people are interested in any of that, particularly if they want to find out, if they want to support it, feel free. You can go to the website and learn more. We have an events page. People can look at past events that we've done. We've done quite a few things, and we're going to continue to do those things. So
wonderful. Well,
yeah.
Congrats. It seems like you are staying busy, and this has been one of
Very
the most
busy.
fascinating deep dives we've ever done. Thank you for opening up the kimono a little bit. It's time to transition now to the Soul Search speed round. Question number 1. Dead or alive, who would you like to have a psychedelic trip with?
Dead or alive, who would I like to have a psychedelic trip with? I would say Carl Jung.
I like that answer. Okay, question number 2. Dennis, you are on a desert island for 10 years and you are by yourself. You get to have one mind-altering substance. Who you got?
Good Nepali hash.
Hash. Okay, I was not expecting that. Okay, question number 3. Let's say you go to Dennis in the past, and for whatever reason, you have not done any psychedelics, any psilocybin, you haven't done any ayahuasca, and for whatever reason, you can only do one the rest of your life. You can either do micro dosing or you can do macro full dosing. Who you got?
Oh, macro dosing.
Amen. Okay.
Macro dosing for sure. Micro dosing, we can talk about micro dosing. In my opinion, it's probably a waste of time in most cases. I think that micro dosing can, I think that people forget, people that are into micro dosing, and I'm not saying it doesn't have benefits, they shouldn't forget though that just around the corner, just a few grams more, and it opens up a world of wonder that they may that they may not be aware of. And that's really what psychedelic discovery is about. Microdosing may be good to maintain certain things on a day-to-day basis, but if you haven't taken a full-on psychedelic and only microdosed, well, yeah, you should take a look beyond the chrysanthemum.
It's better than nothing. If I would have someone do it rather than none, I would rather than no psychedelics. That's better, but it's almost like it's like stretching before the workout and then not doing the actual workout.
Exactly.
You've got the real payoff is with the bigger doses. Okay, so last question, Dennis. So imagine you're walking down the street and you are parched. You walk around the block, you pop into a bar, you want to wet your beak. You pull up a chair and you're sitting there, and up pulls the chair, and the person sitting next to you is God. And he says, "Hey, Dennis, I'm a big fan of yours. I got to run. There's this hot goddess I have a date with down the street. I got time for one question, though. What is the one question you would ask God?"
Well, the one question I would ask God, prove to me that you're real.
That's pretty good. Okay, Dennis, last question for you. Where can the viewers
This is number
find you?
5. This is your bonus, but okay.
Well, it's not really a question. It's a chance for you to plug your stuff. Where can the viewers find you, or do you have any action items for them?
Okay, well, the website, www.mckenna.academy. So academy is the suffix, like .com or .org. It's like mckenna.academy. And the website is there. You can look at the events that we've done. You can look at we have resources there. So like links into this ethnobotany course and other things. That's the place. And while you're at it, you can sign up for the newsletters to keep in touch with. That's a pretty good way to keep abreast of what we're up to. And if you're so moved, you can send a donation, and we always appreciate that.
Good stuff. We'll get those links in the description. Dennis McKenna, thank you so much for joining the show.
Okay, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
That is all the time we have for today's episode of the Psychedelic Diaries. Thank you to Dennis McKenna, to producer Kevin, of course. I'm Ray Christian. See you next time.
See you next time. Okay.